one can't escape the plain fact that a former Reform UK politician has just been sentenced to more than a decade in prison for very, very serious bribery offences. So, by its very nature, this case does cut to the heart of democratic integrity and raises serious questions for Reform UK, but all parties, about the safeguards against corruption in our politics. So I think it's important to realise that this reckoning should go beyond one particular individual, Gill, and it should go beyond one single party. All parties, whatever their political stripes, really must be clear in their response to this, which is that, taking bribes to help foreign hostile states get a more favourable hearing in Parliament or within the public really has no place in the UK and in our democracy. And I think it's also important to recognise, and I think your listeners, this is where it's important to hear their views, is public trust in politicians is at rock bottom. And that problem isn't contained to one party. And it also hasn't happened overnight. You mentioned earlier, Matthew, the COVID inquiry report that came out earlier this week. And on entering office, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, committed to restoring honesty and standards in public life. And we've seen some positive steps, but there is a long way to go on delivering that. And we need to see delivery on those reforms now.
How much bigger is the picture of Russian interference in UK democracy, in UK politics, than we're actually seeing? And I've seen allegations of interference in the Scottish independence referendum, which is, predates Brexit by some years. And I think we've seen statements about the Russian involvement in Brexit, or the desire for destabilisation of the European Union. How much more widespread is it than Nathan Gill?
I think that's exactly the question we should be asking after this case. It's very easy to say this was quite unique. Nathan Gill is the first British politician to be convicted of bribery offences in the UK. But I think to stop there, as your question suggests, would be a real mistake, because it misses what's really significant about this case. And that's because it's lifted the lid on a much bigger and more pervasive problem. And that's the vulnerability of our politics to foreign influence. And the prevalence, I think, of the threats to our democratic politics as malign actors look to corrupt our elected officials. I think it's important that, listening to the sentencing yesterday, as we did at Spotlight on Corruption, it was very clear that Gill enlisted other British MEPs to parrot the same lines in their speeches. I should be clear that the prosecution didn't allege those others knew about Gill's financial motivation. But I think it's important because it shows the corrosive effects of bribery. It doesn't just stop with corruption of one individual, Gill, but really distorts our democratic processes and the shape of our politics more broadly. And I think that the real question here is we need more transparency. You've asked, what is the scale of the problem? Well, the answer to that is we actually don't know, because we do not hear from the government what the assessment is of that. And that's the first step to restoring confidence in our democracy, is to have greater transparency about the levels of foreign interference that the UK faces, and also what the government's doing to tackle that. We've had recently the China spy case that was aborted, which raised similar questions. We should be hearing from the Security Minister to Parliament at least once a year, giving an insight into the scale of the threat and what is being done to respond to it.
We have the son of an agent, Russian agent, KGB agent, elevated to the House of Lords by Boris Johnson. That raised alarm bells and eyebrows over here. What does Russia want from us? This is one of the interesting questions. If it's all true, if all the allegations are true, all the claims are true, what's the end game? What do they want from us?
Well, I think it really is about damaging trust in our democracy and our democratic institutions. In this case, it leaves the public wondering, can we rely on what we hear in political debate? Or is it tainted by disinformation or foreign influence? And that's ultimately what hostile state actors, what malign actors are looking to achieve. It's about damaging public trust, damaging the credibility of our democratic institutions, and that's where we need to focus our attention on strengthening safeguards.
Can voters trust a party where the head of one of the home nations, the head of the Welsh branch of reform, if we like, was a Russian spy? Can we trust reform?
I think it's important to be clear that this is about an individual. At this stage, there's no evidence that it's gone beyond an individual. This was during a time when Nathan Gill was an MEP for the Brexit Party in 2018 and 2019. But I think it's the question that all political parties should be asking, because it's the question the public's going to be asking. And it's for every political party to come forward and show what they would do to restore trust in public life and standards in public life. And that's where we need to see action from the government.